What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Dragonknight DPS. So the Stam DK got an interesting move in Dragonhold. In an attempt to create some sort of class identity, Zos has decided to change how Stone Giant works. This is the first skill under the Earth and Heart line, and they basically created it into a stamina spammable. In addition to basically making it viable as a spammable, he also added in a unique debuff, the first debuff of its kind in ESO, which basically increases the damage taken, but not as a percentage, but as a flat number, based on how many stacks of stagger you get from the new and improved Stone Giant. So basically, Stam DKs kind of have a little bit of a group utility now, a unique debuff that is pretty much unique in terms of pretty much everything in ESO. It stacks with minor vulnerability, it stacks with major vulnerability. It's a very odd debuff. It's very small, but every single little bit of additional DPS does make a difference. So just like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over gear. So if you want to know what gear I am running in this particular build, or what other gear you might want to run, be sure to check out the Stamina DPS gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner right now. So I recommend that you guys pause this video and check that video out if you guys have questions about gear, and then come back here. This video is going to be taking a look at just the skills that we're using as well as our rotation. So we'll be doing a 29 million demon parse so you guys can see the actual rotation in its entirety. So with all that said and done, let's go ahead and get started here with our skills. So in terms of skills, not much flexibility here. There are a handful of flex spots though, so just bear with me while we go over some of the other abilities that we might want to have on hand once we get to those flex spots. So for our front bar, this is the dual wield bar. We are going with dual wield here. You can also run two-handed if you'd like. Dual wield is going to be a little bit stronger, but the difference is pretty small between dual wield and two-hander for a stamina DK. So we're running Venomous Claws and Noxious Breath. We're doing Stone Giant. This is the new stamina spammable here, and you will notice that we have the stagger status effect here, which increases damage taken by 45 per stack. So it is a flat increase, like I mentioned earlier, not a percentage increase like Zen, Martial Knowledge, or Minor Vulnerability, so it does stack with those debuffs. Because it's a flat number, it's a little bit strange, and it's not very large. You can only get 3 stacks at a time, so a maximum of 135, and if an enemy is able to be stunned, you will basically remove all the stacks of stagger, but because bosses can't be stunned, you will actually be able to maintain all 3 stacks of stagger if you play your skills and rotation correctly. Next we have Whirling Blades. You're going to be using this as an execute ability. And then we have Barbed Trap and Flawless Dawnbreaker. So Flawless Dawnbreaker is here for the additional weapon damage bonus that you get from the Fighter's Guild's passive. And on our back bar, this is the bow bar. We are running Flames of Oblivion, Poison Injection, and Endless Hail. We also have Soul Trap here. This is a bit of a flex spot. This just gives us a little bit of additional sustain because it does cost magicka. You don't necessarily need to run it, but it's always nice to have some additional cushion when it comes to sustain. So I like to run Soul Trap here, but you can swap this out with any other ability. We have Barbed Trap again for the additional weapon damage on the back bar, and then we have Standard of Might, which is going to be the main ultimate that we're going to be using in both AoE fights as well as boss fights. So in terms of other abilities you could be running here. So one ability that you might want to consider putting on is going to be, where is it? The Molten Armaments or Igneous Weapons for the major brutality that you'd get, and this basically allows you to use minor heroism potions, so you get Restore Stamina and the minor heroism, so you could just run Igneous Weapons and Molten Armaments here. I personally don't recommend doing so, but it is one potential option. I don't think it is worth running Minor Heroism Potion. 1, it's too expensive, and 2, you would be giving up a damaging ability in order to run this ability, so you would be ending up losing some DPS. But if you want to source a major brutality and you don't want to run weapon damage potions, you can of course run this ability here. If you do decide to use a two-handed weapon, you'll be using Executioner instead of Whirling Blades. I just want to point that out here. If you don't want to run Whirling Blades or Executioner, you can replace this front ability here with any Fighter's Guild ability, and we'll go over when, why, and where you would use the specific Fighter Guild ability. If you want, you could run Rapid Strikes as a spammable instead of Stone Giant. So you would still be running Stone Giant for the 3 stacks of Stagger, but rather than just using Stone Giant as a spammable, you would instead be running Rapid Strikes. I did not have as good success with Rapid Strikes compared to just running flat Stone Giant, but your mileage may vary. So definitely a possible ability here. So you basically replace Whirling Blades with Rapid Strikes, and then once you get 3 stacks of Stagger, you would basically use Rapid Strikes from there on out as your spammable, and just use Stone Giant in order to reapply that 3rd stack of Stagger. But generally speaking, I found it to be better just to use Stone Giant as your straight up spammable, and then just swap over to using Whirling Blades at around 33% health or so. Now, I had the best DPS while I was running Endless Hail rather than Arrow Barrage. Another added advantage of running Endless Hail is that you're casting it less often, so that basically allows you to give you a little bit more additional sustain. The actual sustain difference is going to be fairly small, but every little bit does help out, especially with this Dragonhold patch where sustain is going to be a little bit on the lower side of things. So you could run Arrow Barrage instead. Endless Hail, running this, also allows you to use the Maelstrom Bow in trash fights without really losing too much effectiveness on the Maelstrom effect here, because Endless Hail does last for a longer period of time. So that's just one potential kind of ability swap that you could potentially go for. Next, I want to talk about the Fighter Skilled line. So I did mention you can replace Whirling Blade with the Fighter Skilled passive if you would like any Fighter Skilled ability here. So the 2 that you're going to want to use are going to be either Ring of Preservation, which gives you minor protection as well as a pretty decent heal, so 648 every half second, so about just under 1300 per second, so it's a pretty decent heal. You also get that minor protection, again, for some additional mitigation, so really nice if you need a lot of mitigation along with a self-heal. So there are a few instances where Ring of Preservation would make sense. Then Camouflaged Hunter will give you minor Berserk if you deal critical damage from an enemy's flank. So it is possible to just run Camouflaged Hunter and get the minor Berserk. So you don't necessarily need to rely on your healers for the minor Berserk anymore. There may be some instances where your healer won't actually be able to get you the minor Berserk. So for example, if you're on the portal group for Navita's hard mode, you don't have a healer downstairs, so you'd be wanting to run Camouflaged Hunter in order to get that minor Berserk while you're down there. So definitely a pretty decent ability to have slotted here. And then from there, under the Undaunted line, you could also run Shadow Silk to help give out synergies for your other stamina DPS, to help proc Lokkestiiz for some additional major Slayer bonuses. Then if you need a heal, you can go with either Echoing Vigor or Resolving Vigor. Most DPS will prefer, I recommend at the very least, running Echoing Vigor, because Echoing Vigor can stack with other Echoing Vigors. So even though the heal is only a little bit weaker, and the healing done per second is a little bit weaker compared to Resolving Vigor, because it can stack with other people's Echoing Vigor. If you have 2 or 3 Echoing Vigors going on in group, that ends up being a stronger heal than just running pure Resolving Vigor. So that's why I highly recommend just sticking with Echoing Vigor rather than Resolving Vigor as a self-heal. And that's pretty much all the different abilities that you could run. So again, just to break things down for you, on your front bar here, these 3 abilities here, Venomous Claws, Noxious Breath, Stone Giant, as well as Barbed Trap, these are abilities you want to keep on your front bar. Whirling Blades is arguably a flex spot. I've had the best success using Whirling Blades, but you could swap this out for a number of abilities depending on how you want to do it. So you can run Rapid Strikes if you want to try out using that instead of Stone Giant as your primary spammable. You can put down just a flat up Fighter Skilled ability if you just don't want to run Whirling Blades at all, you just want to simplify the rotation. So a few options here. On the back bar, these first 3 abilities, and I'd argue Soul Trap is also a pretty strong ability to keep on hand. So Flames of Oblivion, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, and Soul Trap. These 4 I would say you want to keep on hand. The Barbed Trap on the back bar you can swap out for Vigor if you'd like. This is just for the weapon damage bonus, so you don't really need this ability here, but it is always nice to have the option to put down your trap on both bars here. And then I do want to point out the Standard of Might. You don't necessarily have to run Standard of Might. It is going to be the strongest option for you. But if you want some additional sustain, you could actually, in theory, run the Bow Ultimate Ballista instead. cost less ultimate, but Dragonites do get some resources back whenever they activate an ultimate. So you will be getting more resources, or I shouldn't say more resources, but you will getting resources back more frequently if you are running Ballista. So it does help out a little bit with your sustain compared to running Dragonknight Standard. Even though the Standard does return more resources, it does take a longer period of time to get the number of ultimate back. It costs 250 compared to 175 here. So just one option I just want to kind of present to you guys if you want to use Ballista rather than Dragonknight Standard. But Standard of Might is the stronger ultimate here. The other disadvantage of running Standard is that in order to get the most damage out of it, you have to make sure the boss stays within the radius of Standard of Might. So if you're fighting a boss that's bouncing around a lot, Ballista will be a better option because it'll always stick on the boss no matter where the boss is going. So for that regard, yes, there is a place for Ballista on a Stam DK setup, but if you can, stick with Standard of Might. So that's pretty much all the skills. Now for the rotation. It is a dynamic rotation, so you will be... there is no written rotation at all, so it's all going to be dynamic. The point of a dynamic rotation is to basically maximize the uptime on your dots by basically more or less just casting dots as they run out. So why is it dynamic? Well, you have a couple of different ability durations here. So Soul Trap and Poison Injection are both 10 seconds. Flames of Oblivion is 15, Barbed Trap is 18, Endless Hail is 14, as are Noxious Breath and Venomous Claws. So a few variations here in the durations of things, so you will want to do a dynamic rotation here. So for example, for dynamic rotation, I always like to start off with Minor Force, so run Barbed Trap here. You're going to start off with Barbed Trap. So you do want to try to maintain 3 stacks as best you can. But you can see here that our timers are not running in sync with each other. So instead we are just prioritizing and re-upping our dots as they run out here. You can see here, back bar just decided to run out, and like that. That's kind of what a dynamic rotation looks like. You're basically just keeping an eye on all your dots and basically re-upping them as soon as they run out. Now, of course, you have quite a few dots here. So if you count Flames of Oblivion as a 15-second dot, you have essentially 7 dots to maintain. And so naturally the question comes, well, if I have multiple dots that are on cooldown, which dot do I prioritize? So, if you're running the Master's Bow like I am, the main dot you want to prioritize is going to be Poison Injection, because that is how you get the additional weapon damage from the Master's Bow. You need to have Poison Injection active on the boss. So Poison Injection is definitely the first ability you want to have active. Equally important is going to be Endless Hail, or Air Barrage if you're running that morph there. This is important because you want it to proc your enchant. So your enchant on your back bar will not proc off of Poison Injection because that's a single target dot that only proc off of an AoE weapon dot, so that would be Endless Hail. So you want to make sure you have Endless Hail and Poison Injection going at all times. And then you want Barbed Trap for the Minor Force. All the other dots are basically secondary to that, so that would be your Soul Trap, your Venom's Claw, your Noxious Breath, and Flames of Oblivion. The next thing to keep in mind with your rotation, and you guys might have seen it here when I was doing kind of the sample rotation here, is you want to maintain 3 stacks of stagger at all times. So what I like to do is I always like to end, or I should say, I want to go into my back bar if I'm swapping into my back bar rotation to basically renew any dots on the back bar. I like to end it with Stone Giant. Stone Giant, the stagger stacks last for 6 seconds, so you are in theory able to get 5 abilities off on the back bar before you have to go to your front bar to renew Stone Giant. I like to keep it safe and just run 4 abilities on my back bar, so let's say all of my abilities are starting to run out on the back bar. I would use 4 of them, swap to my front bar, renew the stagger stacks, and then go back to my back bar and finish up whatever dot I need to put down, whether that's standard or big Barbed Trap or Soul Trap or something like that. So that's really important to maintain here, the additional 3 stacks of stagger. Once we get into the execute range, which for me, when you want to start using Whirling Blades, is going to be roughly around 35 to 30% health remaining. While you are using Whirling Blades as a spam bolt, you still want to maintain all your stacks, and you'll see it when we do the 20mm demi parse, but I always try to maintain those stacks. Again, whenever I start going to my back bar, I do Stone Giant, I do a light attack on my front bar, and then do my bar swap immediately into my skills on my back bar. So that's kind of how I try to maintain staggers here, and then I always try to start the front bar rotation with Stone Giant. So you'll see in the 20mm demi parse when I start using Whirling Blades, I will start off with a Stone Giant, and then start using Whirling Blades. If I need to renew any dots, obviously I renew my dots, and then go into Whirling Blades that way. Once you get into Execute, you might find it worthwhile to start dropping some dots, so just not using any dots at all. The 2 dots that I would say you would want to start dropping would be Noxious Breath and Soul Trap if you elect to drop any dots at all, as well as Flames of Oblivion. So in Execute, which I would define as a roughly probably around 20%, 15% health, as you get closer to killing the boss and you want to drop some dots, just maintain Venomous Claws, Endless Hail, and Poison Injection, and Barbed Trap. You don't really need to run Soul Trap or Flames of Oblivion or Noxious Breath. You're better off just using those global cooldowns and using your Whirling Blades or Executioner spamble there as you get closer and closer to 0 to killing the boss. So you kind of see an example of that when we do the 21mm demi parse. So I kept on saying things, 21mm demi parse, 21mm demi parse. So here we go. We're going to do a 21mm demi parse here. So you guys can get an idea of where the Stam DK stands to other DPS classes. So just to give you an idea, the highest Stam DK parse that I have seen currently is around 87k. I don't quite hit that number. I am not a DPS main by any means. I don't really DPS very often on the live server. So my parse is going to be a little bit lower, but you can still use this parsing compared to other DPS specs that I have on my channel. Let's go ahead and get started here with our parse, and I will try to narrate things as we go along. So we are running Lokkestiiz on our front bar, so we do want to make sure we use our synergies while we're on our front bar. Again, I start off with Stone Giant, and I go use Stone Giant before I go into my back bar, as you guys see there. So in that instance, I prioritized getting the trap off because I did have a couple of seconds remaining on Stone Giant. So I decided to just re-up the minor force from trap before going into my Stone Giant. And I did have some time left on that. So you can see here I had another 2 seconds, and that's enough for me to get off my rearming trap here. So I am going to go on my back bar here to drop standard here. One thing I will mention here for Venomous Claws in particular is that you do want to let Venomous Claw run completely out, because each consecutive tick that it does deals more damage. So the last tick of Venomous Claws does more damage than the first hit tick. Make sure you're letting Venomous Claw run completely out before you renew it, that way you get your hardest ticks going. See here, keep myself to 4 abilities on the back bar so I don't risk dropping these stagger stacks. Again, let Venomous Claw run completely out before you renew it. Prioritize the point injection on the back bar here, as well as rearming trap before we go for the Venomous Claw and Noxious Breath reapplication. Didn't quite get my stacks back in time, so I have to recreate all these stacks. Not a big deal, it's only 3 stacks, but you kind of want to avoid doing that as much as you can. Again, 4, go to our front bar, renew our 3 stacks, and then finish off the back bar stuff. We're getting close to the point where we're going to start using Whirling Blades, so in about 2 or 3 more percentage health, we will be swapping over to Whirling Blades. So around here, we'll start swap over to Whirling Blades. Get Stone Giant to maintain our stacks, renew our dots, and do Whirling Blades. Maintain these stacks. Again, I like to make sure I have go into my back bar rotation. So at this point, I'm going to start dropping Noxious Breath and Soul Trap here. That way I can focus on using more Whirling Blades instead. I missed my stacks here, so I gotta rebuild them real fast. Alright, so there we go. That is the rotation of a Stam Decay. Again, dynamic, so please don't ask me to write it down, because I will basically tell you that there is no written rotation, because it is a dynamic rotation. We are able to hit around 81.4k if you decide to round up to the closest 100. So a lot of our damage here is actually going to be more from damage over time components. So if you guys take a look at constellations like I have here, you actually will have a few more points in Authority than you would in Master at Arms. And that's mainly because a lot of this stuff is dot damage. So for example, Stone Giant is our primate. While it does take up a lot of our DPS, it's 14.7% of our overall DPS. All the rest of this is basically dot damage. So Arms of Relequen, Venomous Claws, Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Soul Trap, Barb Trap, all of these are dot damage. So we will want to have a little bit more in the Thaumaturge than you would for Master at Arms here. But you can actually track your stagger stacks here. So if you take a look at Stone Fist here, we have 94% uptime. The ideal is going to be obviously try to get as close to 100% as you can. You did see that I did drop it a few times. Not as bad as if you were to drop, like for example, Relequen or something, because it's only 3 stacks, but you do want to try to maintain those as best you can. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all about the build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.